Would you risk it all for a knock on the door? Wilson and Amanda thought they had found a new home, a fresh start in a quiet apartment complex. But there was something off about their neighbors. No greetings. No conversations. Just an eerie, unspoken silence that smothered the building. Then one night, the silence was broken. A desperate, gut-wrenching sob echoed through the halls. Someone needed help. Wilson had a choice: ignore it like everyone else, or knock on the door. That one knock changed everything. Why did the neighbors act like strangers? What happened to the man who lived in Wilson's flat before him? And why did the last person who asked questions disappear? By the time Wilson and Amanda realized the truth, it was too late. They had already broken the one rule that kept everyone safe. Now, something or someone is watching them. Stay till the end to uncover the chilling truth about this apartment complex. Subscribe for more spine-chilling stories that will make your nights lovely. Comment below, would you have knocked on the door?
Mr. Wilson, you do not get it, something is wrong with this place.
Mrs. Cynthia, it's just an apartment. Just a normal apartment is all I can see.
No, it is not. The last person who lived in this same flat you rented disappeared. He vanished without a trace.
My name is Wilson, and here is my story. Moving into the new apartment felt different. Not because of the structure or location, but because of the people. The 4-flat building was oddly quiet, too quiet. Back where I came from, neighbors talked, shared meals, and looked out for each other. Here, no one even said hello. It was as if everyone had silently agreed to exist separately, never interfering in each other's lives. On the first day, I tried to greet the man living in the flat opposite mine. He was locking his door as I stepped into the hallway. "Good morning," I said, offering a small nod. He paused for a second, his hand gripping the key in the lock. His eyes flickered toward me, briefly, coldly, before he turned away, pretending not to hear. No response. Just silence. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was in a hurry. Maybe he didn't hear me. But then it happened again. And again. My wife, Amanda, experienced the same thing. The woman downstairs, Cynthia, who we assumed was our direct neighbor, would rush inside whenever she saw us approaching. Even the children in the building hardly played outside. There was no laughter, no chatter, just an eerie, unsettling quiet. At first, I thought it was just city life. People in big towns always seemed busier, colder. But this was different. It wasn't the usual mind-your-business attitude, it was extreme. Deliberate. Like they were hiding something. One evening, as Amanda and I sat on our small balcony, she leaned closer and whispered, "Have you noticed how no one interacts here?" I nodded. It's like they've made a pact to avoid each other. She shivered slightly. It's unnatural. We tried not to dwell on it. We were new here, after all. Maybe it was just how things were done. But deep down, I knew this silence was more than just a habit. It was a warning. And soon, we would find out why. The first few months passed, and we settled into our daily routines. Work, home, sleep. The silence remained, but we adapted. It became just another part of our existence, like the walls around us, oppressive yet familiar. We stopped expecting greetings from our neighbors. We stopped questioning the heavy quiet that lingered in the hallways. My downstairs neighbors, Cynthia and her husband, Peter, rarely spoke. Their curtains were always drawn, their front door always shut. The few times I saw Peter, he moved with a hurried stiffness, barely glancing up. Cynthia was even more elusive, slipping in and out like a shadow. The strangest part. I had never seen their child. Amanda and I had overheard the muffled sounds of a little girl's voice once, but that was it. No playing outside, no laughter, just an eerie absence. At night, our apartment felt even more detached from the world. No televisions humming through the walls. No distant conversations. Even the crickets outside seemed subdued, as if the building itself swallowed all sound. Then, on a regular night at 10:30 p.m., I heard it. A sound I had never heard in this silent building. A soft, muffled cry. At first, I thought it was a stray cat or maybe a baby next door. But as I listened closer, a chill ran down my spine. This wasn't an animal. It wasn't even a baby. It was an adult sobbing, their voices thick with pain. A low, gut-wrenching sound that made my chest tighten. And it didn't stop. I sat up in bed, my ears straining. Amanda stood beside me, rubbing her eyes. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She frowned and sat up. A few seconds later, she nodded slowly. "Yes, someone's crying." The sound drifted through the air like a ghost, weaving its way into our apartment. It wasn't coming from inside our flat. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was somewhere outside close, yet nowhere in sight. I stood up and walked to the window, pushing the curtain. The compound below was empty. The neighbor's house stood silent in the moonlight, its windows dark. Yet, the sobbing persisted, surrounding me like an unseen presence. A strange sense of unease settled in my stomach. Where was it coming from? And why did it sound like no one else in the building cared? I sat up in bed, listening carefully. The sound drifted through the air like a ghost, soft yet piercing, sorrowful yet distant. It carried a weight that sent a chill through my spine. It wasn't just someone crying. It was grief in its rawest form, a sound that didn't belong in a place so silent. Amanda stood beside me, rubbing her eyes groggily. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She frowned, still half asleep, and sat up. A few seconds later, she stiffened. Her eyes, now fully awake, locked onto mine. "Yes, someone's crying." We sat there for a moment, just listening. The sobbing was steady, unbroken, carrying through the dead air like a warning. It wasn't the wail of a child, nor the restrained tears of someone holding back emotion. It was raw, open, and unfiltered. I swung my legs over the bed and walked cautiously toward the window. A faint, cold breeze slipped through the cracks as I pushed the curtain aside. The compound below was empty, bathed in the dim glow of a flickering streetlight. The neighbor's house stood eerily still, its windows dark like empty sockets. No movement. No sign of life. But the crying remained, louder now, closer somehow. My heart pounded harder. Where was it coming from? I pressed my forehead against the glass, scanning the compound again. Nothing. No shadowy figure, no open window where the sound could escape from. Just the overwhelming stillness of the night and the relentless sobbing. I turned to Amanda. She was standing now, arms wrapped around herself, her expression unsettled. "This doesn't feel right," she murmured. I swallowed. She was right. Something about this cry wasn't normal. And the worst part. No one else in the building seemed to notice. Not a single light turned on in any of the other flats. Not a single door opened in curiosity. It was as if we were the only ones who could hear it. The sound was disturbing. It wasn't the cry of a baby but that of an adult. But there was something unusual about it. The kind of cry that did not just come from sadness but from deep, unbearable pain. It sent a shiver down my spine, and my body tensed. I turned to Amanda, who was now standing near the bed with her arms wrapped around herself with a worried face. "Should we check?" I asked. My voice was lower than I intended. She hesitated. "Maybe it's not our business." I knew what she meant. We had spent months in this building, surrounded by people who refused to acknowledge each other. A place where greetings were ignored, doors remained firmly shut, and silence was the unspoken rule. This place thrived on indifference. But that was exactly the problem. No one here cared about anyone. The sound of the sobbing grew fainter for a moment, as if whoever it was had run out of breath. Then it started again, ragged and pained, seeping through the walls, crawling under my skin. What if it was something serious? What if someone was hurt? I clenched my jaw. It could be a domestic dispute, someone in trouble, or something much worse. My mind spun through possibilities, each one darker than the last. I exhaled, making up my mind. I have to check. Amanda caught my wrist. Be careful, she whispered, her fingers tightening around mine. I nodded, threw on a shirt, and stepped toward the door. As my hand gripped the doorknob, I hesitated for just a second, taking in the unsettling silence of our flat. Then, I turned it and stepped into the darkness. I threw on a shirt and stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The air in the hallway felt heavier than usual, pressing against my skin like an unseen force. The sobbing hadn't stopped. If anything, it sounded closer, as if the walls themselves were carrying the sound toward me. Each step I took felt hesitant, yet urgent. The corridor was eerily silent apart from the muffled cries. The fluorescent bulb flickered weakly overhead, casting unsettling shadows along the narrow hallway. I passed by the other apartments, their doors tightly shut, their occupants undisturbed by the noise or deliberately ignoring it. Reaching the staircase, I hesitated for a moment, gripping the railing. My pulse was quickening, and an uncomfortable heat crept up my spine. A part of me wanted to turn back, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But another, stronger part of me, the part that couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, urged me forward. I descended slowly, my footsteps light against the cold tiles. The sobbing turned into a faint whimper as I approached the door of my neighbor downstairs. My palms felt clammy, a thin layer of sweat forming as I raised my fist and knocked once. No response. I knocked again, harder this time, the sound echoing through the silence. A shuffling noise came from inside, followed by a hesitant creak as the door slowly opened. My neighbor's wife Cynthia stood in the doorway, her eyes red and wide with panic. She clutched the edge of the doorframe, her knuckles white, as though she were using it to hold herself upright. And then, behind her, on the couch, I saw her child motionless. My breath caught in my throat. The small figure lay still, too still. My mind raced, but my body reacted faster. Without thinking, I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my ears. My breath caught in my throat. The girl was pale, too pale. Her lips were slightly parted, her small chest eerily still. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. Was she even breathing? For a second, I froze. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, suffocating, paralyzing. The sobbing of the mother filled the silence, her whole body trembling as she clutched at the doorframe. What happened? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Tears streamed down Cynthia's face, her breath coming in uneven gasps. She was eating. She choked. And then, she stopped moving. The sheer helplessness in her eyes sent a jolt through my system. I didn't have time to think. Instinct took over. I lunged forward, crossing the room in seconds. My hands shook as I scooped the child into my arms. Her body was limp, terrifyingly light, as though life itself had already left her. I had read about what to do before when someone was choking. I had seen demonstrations in books, maybe even watched a video or two. But this was different. This was real. And I was terrified. My mind screamed at me to act, but fear clawed at my chest, threatening to slow me down. What if I did it wrong? What if I was too late? No. I couldn't afford hesitation. With a deep breath, I positioned the child upright, wrapping my arms around her tiny body. My hands found their place just above her stomach, and I pressed inward and upward. Hard. Once. Twice. Nothing. Panic surged through me. I tightened my grip and tried again. Harder this time. Still nothing. The mother let out a strangled sob, collapsing onto her knees beside me. Amanda rushed into the room, her eyes darting between the motionless child and my frantic movements. What's happening? She cried. Call for help. I backed, my voice trembling. I couldn't stop now. I wouldn't stop. I pressed again. Harder. Faster. My arms ached, but I didn't care. And then, a small gasp. The faintest sound, but enough to send a jolt of hope through me. The child's body jerked slightly. A second later, she coughed violently, her tiny chest heaving as she expelled whatever had been blocking her airway. Then, she sneezed. Vomited. And finally, she cried. The most beautiful, heartbreaking sound I had ever heard. The child's body remained limp in my arms, an unbearable weight that sent waves of terror through me. I tried to block out the mother's muffled sobs, the way her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the couch, desperate for a miracle. My own fear threatened to take over, but I forced it down. This wasn't the time to panic. Amanda gripped my arm tightly, her fingers digging into my skin. I turned to look at her and saw tears brimming in her eyes. She had been holding her breath, watching every second unfold with fear and helplessness. "She's breathing," Amanda whispered, almost as if saying it out loud would break the fragile moment. I nodded, still shaking. "She's breathing." The little girl coughed weakly, her small body shuddering in her mother's arms. She was exhausted, her tiny chest rising and falling unevenly. But she was alive. And then another terrifying thought hit me: she had stopped breathing for too long. What if there were complications? What if she needed more help than we could give? "We need to get her to a hospital," I said firmly, forcing myself to stand. The mother's head snapped up, her face struck with tears. Yes, we should go now." Amanda was already reaching for the car keys. I bent down and gently scooped the child into my arms. She was warm but still too weak. Her head lolled slightly against my shoulder. "We don't have time to wait," I said. "Let's go." Without another word, we rushed out into the night. The car engine roared to life as I sped out of the compound, tires screeching against the pavement. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat reminding me of how fragile this moment was. In the back seat, the mother clutched her daughter against her chest, whispering prayers in a trembling voice. The little girl's breathing was shallow but steady. She was still weak, barely responsive. Amanda sat beside them, her hand resting on the mother's shoulder, offering silent comfort. The road ahead was dark, barely lit by scattered streetlights. The hospital was 20 minutes away, 20 unbearable minutes that felt like a lifetime. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The mother rocked back and forth, murmuring, "Please, God, don't take her. Don't take my baby." I pressed my foot harder on the accelerator. The car jolted forward. I didn't care about speed limits. I didn't care about anything but getting to that hospital in time. A red traffic light glowed ahead. I gritted my teeth. Stopping wasn't an option. I slowed just enough to check for oncoming cars before pushing through. My heart pounded harder. What if we got into an accident? What if I made things worse? A deep cough from the backseat broke my thoughts. The child stirred slightly, her tiny fingers twitching against her mother's dress. It was a small movement, but it filled me with hope. "We are almost there," I said, my voice tense but steady. The hospital's glowing sign appeared in the distance. Just a few more turns. Just a few more seconds. As I pulled up to the entrance, I barely put the car in park before throwing the door open. Amanda and I helped the mother carry her daughter out of the backseat. The hospital doors swung open, and nurses rushed forward, assessing the situation in an instant. "She choked, she stopped breathing, we managed to get her back, but she's weak," I said breathlessly. They nodded, understanding the urgency. A nurse scooped the child from her mother's arms, and in a blur of motion, they disappeared behind a set of emergency doors. The mother crumpled into a nearby chair, her hands shaking. Amanda sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I exhaled, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. What if we waited? What if I hadn't knocked? I didn't even want to think about the answer. We sat in silence, the sterile smell of the hospital filling the air around us. The waiting room was nearly empty, aside from a few scattered patients and nurses moving in and out of different wards. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh glow, making everything feel even more surreal. The mother sat hunched forward, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She hadn't stopped whispering prayers under her breath, her lips moving rapidly. Amanda sat beside her, rubbing her back in quiet comfort. I sat across from them, my leg bouncing anxiously, my ears straining to catch any sound from the emergency room. Every minute felt like an eternity. Then, at last, a figure emerged from behind the double doors, a doctor, his white coat crisp and his face composed. We all sat up, holding our breaths as he approached. "She's fine," he said simply. The words hit like a crashing wave, washing away the suffocating fear that had gripped us. The mother let out a strangled sob of relief, her hands flying up to her face as she broke down completely. Amanda let out a shaky breath, squeezing the woman's shoulder. Even I slumped back in my chair, exhaling the tension that had coiled inside me. "She had a lack of oxygen for a short time, but you acted quickly," the doctor continued. "She's stable now. We are keeping her overnight for observation, but she'll be okay." The mother wiped at her tears, nodding rapidly. Thank you so much." The doctor gave a reassuring nod before disappearing back through the doors. For the first time since that awful moment in the apartment, I felt the crushing weight lift slightly from my chest. But as the relief settled, another thought took its place, an unsettling, nagging question that had been lurking at the back of my mind. Where was her husband? I turned to the mother. She was still trembling, her face streaked with tears, but she had yet to reach for her phone. "Have you called your husband?" I asked gently. She flinched, her body tensing. Amanda and I exchanged a glance. She shook her head. "He's traveling." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and something about the way she said it, hesitant, uncertain, made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she avoided my gaze, the way she clutched her hands together as if holding onto something unsaid. I didn't press further, but the unease lingered. Something wasn't right. And I had a feeling we weren't done uncovering the truth. As the doctor's words settled in, "She's fine," I finally exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening just slightly. But even as relief washed over me, something else crept in, a nagging thought I couldn't ignore. Where was the father? I turned to the mother, who was still seated, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her eyes remained fixed on the floor, as if she were afraid to meet my gaze. "Have you called your husband?" I asked carefully. She stiffened, the slightest flinch in her posture, betraying her unease. She hesitated for a bit too long before answering. "He's traveling." The way she said it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them. Hesitant. Guarded. As if she were choosing them carefully, afraid of saying too much. I watched her for a moment. There was something else in her expression, something deeper than exhaustion or relief. Was it fear? Amanda must have noticed it too, because she leaned forward gently. "Do you want us to call him for you?" The woman immediately shook her head, almost too quickly. "No. No, it's fine. He's busy. I don't want to disturb him." I narrowed my eyes. Who wouldn't want to be disturbed if their child had just nearly died? Something was wrong here. The hospital waiting room was quiet, save for the occasional beep of distant monitors and the shuffle of nurses' shoes against the tile floor. I could hear the mother's shallow breaths, uneven and quick. She was holding something back, I could feel it. I glanced at Amanda. Her lips pressed together in thought, but she didn't push further. Instead, she reached out and placed a reassuring hand on the woman's arm. "Well, if you need anything, we're here." The mother nodded, but I could see she was retreating herself, shutting us out. We sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of the night pressing down on all of us. Eventually, the hospital staff allowed her to see her daughter, and she disappeared down the hallway without another word. Amanda turned to me the moment she was out of sight. "She's hiding something." "I know," I said. And I don't think her husband is traveling at all. She nodded slowly. I don't like this. Neither did I. And somehow, I had a feeling this wasn't the last time we'd be tangled up in whatever secret was lurking behind our neighbor's door. The next morning, exhaustion clung to my body like a heavy blanket. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind, the child's lifeless body, the frantic drive to the hospital, the mother's nervous answers. My sleep had been elusive, my thoughts tangled with unease. As Amanda and I climbed the stairs to our apartment, all I wanted was a few hours of rest. But the moment we reached our door, I stopped dead on my tracks. He was there. The missing husband, Peter. He stood just outside our apartment, his posture stiff, his gaze unreadable. But there was something unsettling about the way he stood, as if he had just been rehearsing for this exact moment. Peter didn't look like someone who had just returned from a long journey. There were no travel bags, no weary expression, no remnants of a rushed return. His clothes were neat, his face well shaved. He did not even smell like the road. He stepped forward, extending his hand. I heard what happened, thank you, he said with a very calm voice. His grip was firm, but something about it felt deliberate, as if he was measuring me or testing me. His words were polite, but his eyes were not. They locked onto mine, studying me with quiet intensity. We were just doing what anyone would, I replied, shaking his hand before letting go quickly. That is the thing, he said, tilting his head slightly. Most people here would not. A heavy silence settled between us. I swallowed the growing tension in my throat. Well, we are just glad she's okay. He nodded, but there was something unreadable in his expression, like he knew something I did not know. He took a step back, and said he would not forget our kind gesture. Then, without another word, he turned and walked down the hall, disappearing into the apartment. Amanda exhaled beside me, her grip tightening around my wrist. That was weird. Yeah, I murmured, still staring at the closed door across the hall. Something was very, very wrong in this building. And I had the sinking feeling that we had just crossed an invisible line, one we couldn't step back from. The invitation had come naturally, almost as a reflex. Despite the unease lingering in my guts, Amanda and I couldn't just stand there in awkward silence. So, we invited them in. It felt like a neighborly thing to do. For the first time since moving in, we sat together as neighbors in our small living room. The air was thick with an odd tension, but we tried to act normal. Amanda offered tea, which the woman accepted with a grateful nod. The husband Peter declined. His wife Cynthia did most of the talk. She thanked us again and again, her voice trembling slightly as if she still couldn't believe her daughter was alive. If you hadn't come when you did, she whispered, shaking her head. I don't even want to think about it. I waved off her gratitude, trying to downplay it. Anyone would have done the same. A small, forced smile appeared on her lips. Not here, she muttered. I exchanged a glance with Amanda, who gave me a subtle, questioning look. That was the second time someone had implied that things worked differently in this building. But before I could press further, the husband finally spoke. Why did you get involved? He asked suddenly. His voice was calm, measured. Too measured. The question caught me off guard. I blinked, shifting in my seat. I heard the sobbing. I had to. He tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes locked onto mine. Most people here don't. His tone wasn't casual. It wasn't even a simple observation. It sounded like a warning. A silence settled over the room, thick and uncomfortable. Cynthia dropped her gaze to her lap, her fingers gripping the edges of her cup. Amanda cleared her throat, attempting to break the tension. Well, we're just glad everything turned out okay. Peter didn't respond. He just kept watching me, his expression unreadable. Then, just as abruptly as he had asked, he stood. We should go. His wife Cynthia hesitated, looking like she wanted to say more. But a glance from her husband silenced her. She rose from the couch, still holding their daughter close. Thank you again, she said softly before following him to the door. We walked them out, and as soon as the door clicked shut behind them, Amanda let out a breath she had clearly been holding. That was strange, she muttered, rubbing her arms. I nodded, staring at the door as if expecting him to suddenly knock again. Yeah. Really strange. Something told me this wasn't over. After they left, Amanda and I sat in silence. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The apartment felt even quieter than usual, as if their visit had disturbed something in the air. Did that feel off to you? Amanda finally asked, her voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly, still staring at the door. Yeah. Really off. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he looked at you. Like you did something wrong. I let out a slow breath. Like we broke a rule we didn't even know existed. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just the case of distant neighbors who kept to themselves. The way the husband had reacted, the way his wife had been so cautious with her words, it felt like something more. The silence in this building wasn't just a coincidence. It was deliberate. And that terrified me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Peter's voice in my head. Most people here don't. The words clung to me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. What did he mean by that? Why wouldn't people help a crying woman? The next day, I decided to start paying closer attention. Maybe I had been too distracted with work to really see what was going on around me. So, I observed. And that's when I noticed something chilling. The other neighbors, the ones who had lived here longer than us, never spoke to each other. Not even in passing. Not even a nod in greeting. They moved like shadows, slipping in and out of their apartments without a word. One afternoon, I stood by the window and watched as one of the tenants, an older man from the flat across the hall, stepped outside. He was about to get into his car when another neighbor, a woman from the ground floor, walked past him. She didn't acknowledge him. Not even a glance. But what made my skin crawl was that he didn't acknowledge her either. No greetings. No eye contact. It was as if they didn't see each other at all. It wasn't normal. It was unnatural. That night, as Amanda and I lay in bed, I whispered, "There's something wrong with this place." She turned to look at me, fear flashing in her eyes. I know. And the worst part. I had the terrible feeling that we had already broken the one rule everyone else seemed to follow. The next few days were strange. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't something I could put my finger on, but I could feel it. The other tenants, our neighbors, acted differently. I saw it the way they moved. They are careful now, even more than before. When I passed someone in the corridor, they averted their eyes. When I stepped outside to get groceries, I felt their glances from behind windows, watching, measuring. But no one said a word. No one knocked on our door to ask about the girl. No one asked if she was okay. No one even acknowledged that it had happened. I expected at least some sort of reaction. Maybe a "thank you" from another neighbor, a sign of relief that a child had been saved. But there was nothing. No congratulations, no whispered concerns. Just silence. It was as if the whole thing had never happened. One evening, I was taking out the trash when I spotted the old man from the flat across the hall. He was locking his door, his back turned to me. I hesitated, then cleared my throat. "Good evening," I said. My voice echoed slightly in the empty hallway. He paused. For a split second, I thought he would say something back. But then, without a word, he turned the key, stepped inside his apartment, and shut the door. I stood there, gripping the trash bag, my skin crawling. I went back inside and told Amanda. "They're ignoring us," I said, pacing the room. "It's like we did something wrong." She frowned, her expression troubled. "They're afraid." I stopped pacing. "Of what?" She shook her head. I don't know. That night, as we lay in bed, I heard movement outside our door. A soft shuffling, like footsteps hesitating just beyond the threshold. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then, nothing. No knock. No voice. Just a lingering, unsettling presence. And for the first time since moving in, I felt a deep, gnawing sense of regret. We should never have gotten involved. A week has passed. The silence in the building remained unnerving. Amanda and I had learned to move carefully, to speak in hushed tones even when we were alone. Something about this place had changed. Or maybe, we were just finally noticing it for what it was. Then, one night, a knock came at our door. I jolted awake, my heart hammering. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 11:45 p.m. I turned to Amanda, who was already sitting up, her eyes wide with unease. Who would be visiting at this hour? She whispered. I hesitated, then slowly got out of bed. The hallway light was on, casting eerie shadows through the crack under the door. Another knock, this time softer, almost hesitant. I took a deep breath and approached, pressing my ear against the wood. Who is it? A pause. Then, a trembling voice. It's me, Cynthia. I recognized the voice instantly. I unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see her. She stood there, her face pale, eyes darting around nervously. She wasn't wearing a coat, despite the night chill, and her hands were shaking. Can I come in? She whispered, glancing over her shoulder. I stepped aside without hesitation. She slipped inside quickly and, to my surprise, shut the door behind her with quiet but urgent force. What's wrong? Amanda asked, already getting out of bed. Cynthia pressed her back against the door, as if trying to steady herself. She swallowed hard, her breathing uneven. I need to tell you something, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I exchanged a glance with Amanda. A heavy sense of dread settled over me. Whatever she was about to say, I knew it would change everything. She sat on our couch, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles pale. Her whole body trembled as if she was battling an unseen force inside her. The dim glow of our bedside lamp cast long shadows on her face, making the deep sorrow in her eyes even more apparent. My husband Peter wasn't traveling, she finally said, her voice hoarse. He left. I frowned, glancing at Amanda, who sat beside me, equally puzzled. What do you mean? I asked carefully. She inhaled shakily, staring at the floor as if reliving something too painful to face head-on. Peter left that night. When our daughter started choking. A heavy silence fell over the room. I shifted in my seat, a cold feeling creeping over me. But, why? She bit her lip, her hands now gripping her skirt. Peter thought she was already gone, she whispered. He didn't even try to help. He just walked out. My stomach twisted. I felt Amanda stiff beside me. He left. I echoed, hardly able to believe it. He abandoned her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Yes. He saw her struggling. He panicked. And instead of trying to save her, he left. Just like that. The weight of her words pressed down on me. A father. A man who was supposed to protect his family had chosen to run instead. He thought his child was dying, and instead of fighting for her life, he vanished. Amanda's voice was barely above a whisper. Did he come back on his own? The woman exhaled sharply, shaking her head. No. I called him after the hospital. Told him she survived. That's when he returned. I could see the pain in her eyes, the betrayal. She had welcomed him back into their home, but she would never look at him the same way again. Does anyone else know? I asked. She hesitated. Then, almost too softly, she said, no one here would care. A shiver ran down my spine. The eerie silence in the building. The way the neighbors pretended nothing had happened. It all made sense now. This wasn't just about her husband Peter. There was something much darker at play in this apartment. Her words sent a cold shiver down my spine. I leaned forward, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. What do you mean, disappeared? She swallowed hard, glancing over her shoulder at the door as if expecting someone to be listening. This place, it does something to people. Amanda and I exchanged a glance. That doesn't make sense, Amanda said, her voice low. It's just an apartment. The woman shook her head. No. It's not just the building. It's the people. It's the silence. She gripped her arms like she was trying to hold herself together. No one helps anyone here. No one interferes. Because the last person who did, her voice dropped to a whisper. They vanished. A chill crept over my skin. I could tell she wasn't exaggerating. Her fear was real. I forced myself to stay calm. Who disappeared? She hesitated, then whispered a name. Mr. Lewa. I frowned. I had never heard of him. Who was he? Her lips trembled. He lived in the apartment before you. Right where you're staying. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The same flat. Amanda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. He was a kind man. The only one who used to ask questions. If someone looked hurt, he'd check on them. If a child cried for too long, he'd knock on doors. Just like you did. She inhaled sharply. Then one day, he was gone. I clenched my fist. Did anyone report it? His family? The police? She gave me a look that made my stomach twist. His family never came looking. And the police, they never came either. I felt Amanda's grip tighten around my arm. What happened to him? I asked. Cynthia let out a shaky breath. No one knows. One night, he was here. The next morning, his door was wide open, his things untouched, but he was gone. No struggle. No signs of forced entry. Just gone. A heavy silence settled between us. My thoughts raced. If what she was saying was true, then this wasn't just a case of a cold, unfriendly apartment. There was something deeply wrong here. I took a deep breath. Why are you telling us this now? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Because you did something no one else here would dare to do. You knocked on my door. You saved my daughter. Her voice wavered. And I'm afraid this place won't let you get away with it. The weight of her words settled on my chest like a heavy stone. She gripped my hand tighter, her fingers ice cold against my skin. I don't know why. But something is wrong here. Her voice wavered, barely above a whisper. My husband Peter, he wasn't always like this. I swallowed, waiting. He was a good man before we moved in, she continued, her eyes hollow. Loving. Protective. But something changed the longer we stayed here. He stopped caring about me, about our daughter. About everything. I thought about the night she had come knocking, her hands trembling, her voice desperate. The way her husband had stared at me after the hospital. That eerie, emotionless calm. Do you think the apartment did this to him? Amanda asked, hesitant. Cynthia exhaled shakily. I don't know. But when our daughter started choking, I saw something in his eyes. She paused, searching for the words. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was nothing. Like he had already accepted she was gone. Like she didn't matter anymore. A shudder ran through me. And then he just left, she whispered. He walked out the door and didn't come back until morning. I clenched my jaw, the image sinking into my mind. I wanted to believe this was just stress. Just paranoia. But the way she spoke, the sheer terror in her voice, told me this wasn't just about a bad marriage. It was something else. Something deeper. Amanda cleared her throat. Why are you telling us this now? She hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. Because you did something no one else here would dare to do. The room felt smaller. The air, heavier. You knocked on my door, she continued. You didn't ignore it like everyone else. You cared. I shifted in my seat. That's not a bad thing. No, she agreed. But it makes you different. And in this building, different is dangerous. A cold prickle ran down my spine. She stood up, glancing at the door as if she had already stayed too long. Just, be careful. Her voice was urgent now. I don't know how it works. I don't know why. But you changed something that night. I frowned. Changed what? She swallowed hard. People are watching. A sharp knock on the door made all three of us jump. She gasped, backing away. I turned to Amanda, my pulse thundering. Who would be visiting this late? Slowly, I stood up. And then I walked to the door. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across our living room. Amanda sat across from me, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, but she wasn't drinking. She was staring at me, waiting for me to say what we both already knew. We can't live like this, I finally said. She nodded slowly. No, we can't. The silence in this apartment, the cold, unnatural distance, wasn't just a habit. It was fear. And fear only works if people let it. I thought about the woman's words from the night before. You changed something. Maybe that was true. Maybe the moment I knocked on that door, I had set something in motion. And if that was the case, there was no turning back. We had to do something. That day, we started small. We left our door open longer than usual. A crack at first, then wide enough for someone passing by to see inside. We greeted people in the hallway. A nod. A good morning. And everything okay. At first, most of them avoided eye contact. Some hesitated before responding. Others ignored us completely, slipping past like shadows. But then, something changed. An older man on the third floor, whom we had never heard speak, murmured a quiet morning as he passed. A woman we had only seen from afar nodded at us while unlocking her door. A couple with a toddler hesitated at the stairwell, then gave us a small wave. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But it was something. Later that evening, as we sat on our tiny balcony, Cynthia appeared at the railing below. She hesitated, then spoke. You're still trying? I leaned forward. Yes. She shook her head. No one ever does. I glanced at Amanda, then back at her. Maybe that's the problem. She looked down, considering my words. Then, to my surprise, she exhaled and said, There's a woman on the ground floor. Mrs. Ode. She used to talk to everyone before she stopped. I frowned. Stopped. She nodded. Maybe you should talk to her. It was the first time a neighbor had voluntarily shared anything personal. A crack in the wall of silence. And cracks always spread. The next day, Amanda and I knocked on the door of apartment 1B. It took a while before we heard slow, shuffling footsteps. Then the door creaked open an inch. A woman, elderly and thin, peered out. Her tired eyes studied us with suspicion. Yes, she asked. I cleared my throat. Good afternoon, Ma. We just wanted to check in. My name is, I know who you are, she interrupted. Her voice was rough, as if she hadn't spoken much in a long time. I glanced at Amanda, unsure how to proceed. We just wanted to introduce ourselves. We are new here. She snorted. Not that new. You're the one who knocked. My stomach tightened. She sighed and opened the door a little wider. Come in. Mrs. Ade's apartment smelled of old books and dust, but it was warm. She gestured for us to sit, lowering herself into a worn-out armchair. No one talks here, she said after a long pause. That's how it's been for years. I leaned forward. Why? Her eyes locked onto mine. Because talking brings trouble. A chill ran through me. What kind of trouble? Amanda asked softly. Mrs. Ode hesitated, then sighed. There was a man once. A good man. His name was Mr. Tond. He used to help people. Fix things. Settle disputes. He was the kind of man everyone could rely on. She swallowed. Then one day, he was gone. I frowned. Gone. She nodded. No warning. No explanation. One night, he was here. The next morning, his apartment was empty. I felt the hair on my arms rise. No one ever talked about it, she continued. People asked questions at first. But then, one by one, they stopped. Because those who asked, changed. Amanda shifted beside me. Changed how? Mrs. Ode looked at her sadly. Like your neighbor's husband. A silence stretched between us. Something deep and ugly settled in my chest. She sighed. So, after a while, we stopped talking. We stopped interfering. And the silence became normal. I clenched my fist. But that's not living. She looked at me with something like pity. No. But it's surviving. When we left Mrs. Ade's apartment, the weight of her words followed us. We were standing in the middle of something much older, much darker than we had realized. Fear had built this silence. And silence had allowed it to grow. But I thought of my father's words, the ones he had repeated to me since childhood. We all need each other to live this life. I looked at Amanda, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. We weren't going to let fear win. Even if it meant breaking rules we didn't understand. Even if it meant becoming the next people to be watched.